Hey lady, welcome to the Grit, Growth, Grace podcast. If we haven't met, my name is Anne Marie. I'm wife to James and mom to 4 beautiful kids, plus 1 miscarried baby, from 9 months up to 8 years. My hope is to help other women experience the postpartum period, all the way up to the first year of baby's life, as a time of grit, growth, and grace. This is episode 35. Hi, Liddy. How are you? Listen, when I heard the topic that would become the topic for today's episode, I will confess that my very first reaction was not totally logical. You know how sometimes you hear something and the response that you have just doesn't make a lot of sense. So when I first heard about the idea of paternal postpartum depression, that is postpartum depression but occurring in dads, I think it was an article that I'd read. And my first reaction was something along the lines of, first they invade our locker rooms, and now they are taking our postpartum depression, which is a little ridiculous. I totally get it. It is. But that first exposure to the idea primed my heart, because sometime in the month or two after that, I was doing an interview for my work, and the woman that I was speaking to explained to me, in the context of our conversation, that the 4-year age gap between her 3rd and 4th children was due to postpartum depression in her husband. And my heart was open that second time. And I thought, I probably need to learn a little bit more about this. And I guess I would like to say one other thing too. This may be kind of a prickly topic for you, maybe for one of a couple of reasons. Most of the women who listen to this podcast, I think, are coming from a faith-based background, as clearly am I. And I think sometimes there can be a reluctance to talk about mental illness in or from a faith-based perspective, because there are sort of two perspectives that maybe seem to be at odds or competing with each other. And one might be that depression is a spiritual problem with spiritual origins, and so it needs to have spiritual treatments, right? Or a spiritual response. There's another perspective that says depression is purely a medical condition, and so it should have a purely medical treatment plan or response. I would just offer this perspective that depression absolutely can be a medical condition, but I think it can also have, at times, a spiritual component. I think it's a little bit hard to actually put it into a box that it fits neatly in. I think it can have multiple components from what I know. And so for that reason, I think there can be a reluctance to talk about it, or a tendency to talk about depression or mental illness in general from just like a very one-sided perspective. And I found that a much fuller conversation results from looking at it as a multifactorial mental illness, meaning that there can be a spiritual component, certainly, right? If we are living in a way that is not in accord with our moral code, that is not in accord with natural law, then depression may be a natural response of our body to the way that we're living. But because we are humans who live in a fallen world, depression may also have very little to do with the choices that we are making on a day-to-day basis. It may have more of a genetic component. It may have more of a component related to our family or environment growing up, or the situation that we find ourselves in now with certain life circumstances. It can be from and related to many things, exacerbated by certain things. And so I'm simply offering that I think it's important to have this conversation, but also trying to remain sensitive to the fact that it can be difficult to speak about mental illness when we are trying to be faithful, maybe, is that the right word? Be faithful to what we know, but also humble about what we don't know. I'll simply start from there, I think. So I heard about paternal postpartum depression several times, and now, of course, since then, I don't know if this is the reticular activating system or if there really just is a lot more exposure, but this is probably, at this point of recording, probably 6 months since I first heard the topic, and now it just seems like at least once or twice a week I'm hearing about it again. So the thought that I was having, though, that really kind of made me want to bring this up is there are actually very good reasons that dads may experience postpartum depression as well. Some that are the same as what would predispose a mom, and others that might be a little bit different. So that's kind of what I wanted to delve into just briefly today. Nothing too crazy, but just briefly. And so the first thought that I had was, what predisposes a man to postpartum depression, right? Like, what might? Well, just like moms, dads too experience a very significant hormonal drop after the birth of a baby. Now, they're not experiencing an estrogen and progesterone drop, they're experiencing a testosterone drop. And there was a really fascinating 2011 study that found that when you compared brand new dads, and that would just be brand new dads no matter how many children there are, but like a brand new dad, meaning a dad who's just had a new baby, doesn't mean it has to be his first time. But then when they compared brand new dads to single men and fathers with children older than 1 month, those brand new dads, like freshly born babies, still got the wrinkles on them. Those dads had 4 to 5 times lower testosterone levels than the single men, and levels twice as low as dads with babies aged 1 month all the way up to a year. But this persisted. This wasn't just in the immediate postpartum period, because fathers with babies aged 1 month to 1 year in turn had levels twice as low as single men. So dads are experiencing that hormonal drop too. And while testosterone is sort of the hormone that gets men up and moving and going out and doing things in the world, lower testosterone levels are connected to dad staying home to guard the roost, so to speak, to help mom with the caregiving. And actually, it appears that the more caregiving he does, the lower it keeps his testosterone, which makes some sense biologically, right? That you would have lower aggression and risk-taking tendencies when you are caregiving. But at the same time, if testosterone is a major feel-good hormone for him, and his caregiving behaviors are helping keep that low for protective reasons, but that can also make him vulnerable, right? Just like it can make mom vulnerable in that postpartum period to mood difficulties as well. Something else to consider is that just like moms, dads are often sleep deprived too. Now, of course, if you're breastfeeding, right, very possibly dad is not getting up with you. He might be, but maybe he's not. But he's also not sleeping that well, even if he is not getting up regularly or to the extent that you are in the same times. You guys are both going through major hormonal shifts, and that includes him, but it also includes the sleep component as well. So sleep deprivation plays a role for dads just like it does for moms. Another thing is that while there is still inadequate understanding of the support, especially from a broader community, what I would call, as you know, the Grandma Tribe, while there's still an inadequate understanding of the need for that for moms, whether they're first-time or 12th-time moms, I would say there is even less understanding and societal support for dads. Who checks in on new dads? Who checks in on new dads? I don't know that many people do. Something else to consider that might predispose dads to postpartum depression, which, from what I've read, occurs almost as frequently or as frequently as postpartum depression in moms, which that was a jaw dropper for me. Okay, but so another thing that can predispose men is that they may struggle to connect with their wives and babies, right? So for me, for you, for the mom, we've carried this baby for all of these months. We're now either nursing this baby or feeding this baby. At a minimum, we are feeding and diapering and caring for and oohing and ahhing and cooing and resting and all these things with the baby, right? Dad has not had that same type of connection, and sometimes a dad can feel sort of left out or on the periphery or on the outside looking in, as his wife has this major shift, an identity shift, really, right, when a woman becomes a mother, that he is not necessarily part of. Of course he is a dad too, and hopefully he's right there with you, changing diapers and helping bathe the baby and rock the baby and those things that are so good, because he has those broad shoulders that can be so comforting to a crying child. But there still can be a component of otherness that the dad may experience. And also, I've noticed, and I don't know if this is relevant for you, lady, you got to figure it out if this matters, if this has anything to do with you or nothing to do with you. But sometimes a mom will say, oh, you don't know how to do such and such for the baby, just let me do it, right? And sometimes a mom will sort of edge out or push out a dad, not necessarily intentionally, right? How many things do we do terribly intentionally when we are sleep deprived and hormonal? But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means maybe we're less culpable for it or not even aware that it's happening at all. But sometimes we may imply to the dad, you don't know what you're doing. I do. And so all of those things may be connected. And then also, if testosterone also comes through sex, right, and dads feel bonded to moms, husbands to wives, through the act of sex, and there's a moratorium on sex, of course, right, for the first 6 weeks usually. But if you tore, it may be a lot longer than that, right? If you're having physical pain, if you had a C-section, at least 8 weeks, right? So you have pelvic rest, which means no sex, no tampons, etc. That is also an experience the dad is having where he is not getting the testosterone hit that he would be through sex otherwise. So that's not to say, oh, poo for him, like that's so pitiful, we have to change something. No. But it is simply to accept a biological reality of what he may be experiencing, or I should say will be experiencing, but it may be affecting one dad more than another dad. So that may be a component of his experience as well. And then the last thing I was thinking about in terms of what might predispose a dad was this idea that men are expected to man up for their wives and families, meaning that they are expected to oftentimes control or not show any emotions because the focus should be on the wife and the baby. And now here's the thing. Dads are really good at protecting. Dads are really good at protecting and letting the focus be as it should be on their wives and babies. But also, sometimes they need to express their thoughts, their worries, their concerns as well. Maybe not to the extent or in the same way that the mom will. It may not look the same. But dads have thoughts and feelings and emotions and responses and inadequacies and insecurities about their parenting like moms do too. The University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center also shared that up to half of men whose wife or partner experiences postpartum depression will also have symptoms. So a man may experience depression as he is worried about his wife struggling. Or perhaps he's worried about some very significant medical issue his baby may be having. Maybe the baby's in the NICU for a couple of months. Maybe there's some other type of ongoing struggle or medical concern, right? Just like that may really bother mom, it may also really bother dad. So things to look out for paternal or dad postpartum depression. It may not look like it will for a mom. It may not look like it will for a mom. UT Southwestern Medical Center is where I got these symptoms to be aware of, and they include anger, sudden outbursts or violent behavior, an increase in impulsive or risk-taking behavior, including turning to substances, whether those are alcohol or prescription drugs, irritability, low motivation, physical symptoms, which might include headaches, stomach aches, muscle aches, or digestion issues, poor concentration, suicidal thoughts, withdrawing from relationships, and working a lot more or a lot less. So those are all things to be aware of. And then you might be thinking, okay, do you just treat that the same as maternal postpartum depression? Yes and no. Yes, generally the treatment is going to include some combination or one or the other of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy with a trained counselor, and or medications. The most common class is SSRIs or antidepressants, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And while moms, you may be familiar with this already, moms can benefit if they know the right person. Moms can benefit from taking a progesterone supplementation or being put on a progesterone supplementation protocol if you know with somebody who's Creighton trained or trained in another restorative reproductive medicine method. Moms can take progesterone to kind of help smooth that huge drop in hormones after birth. Now, the drop itself is normal, but some women appear to be more vulnerable to that drop, right? So every woman experiences this hormonal drop, but some women may be more predisposed to really hurting from that drop than other women who may be less sensitive, even though they're experiencing the same hormonal shifts. So in women, progesterone is an option, but there is not at present an equivalent for men. So like men don't take testosterone, at least at present. There's not any research into that I know of. Now, for moms who experience maternal postpartum depression, it's recommended to work with a perinatal psychiatrist or a therapist specifically trained in perinatal mood disorders. So my assumption, this is just my assumption, just my thoughts, but my assumption would be that it would make sense for a dad to work with somebody like that too, who has specialized training in perinatal mood disorders. So that's a thought. That's not something that I'm for sure about, but I think logically that would make sense. And the last sort of practical thing that I just wanted to share was the best resource that I know of, that's the easiest to access if you have internet connection, is Postpartum Support International. They have specific resources for paternal postpartum depression, so postpartum depression in dads. And there's something that I've just been thinking about too. This is just occurring to me, so it's off the cuff. So you can take it or leave it, whatever you want. But I am learning how much, to go back to this point of like testosterone being lower, right? Oxytocin is the bonding hormone, and oxytocin surges for mom when she breastfeeds. But oxytocin can surge for both mom and dad with physical closeness and physical touch. And so oxytocin, as the love hormone or the feel-good hormone, is available to us in ways other than sex. A nice long hug or spending time together just holding each other can be a great release of oxytocin. So I don't know how that might look for you, lady. I think it's been many episodes now that I talked about this, but I'm just sort of thinking this might be a context that would be really great to use skin-to-skin time during the postpartum period. Skin-to-skin time is where you spend time just with your skin, so no clothes, but just holding each other. Not for the purpose of taking things further to sex, but simply to be really close to the other person. And you can sort of figure that it's a little bit parallel. I don't have any research on this, but it's a little bit parallel, right, to how a mom calms her child when she puts her child on her chest. Of course, you're not going to hold your husband the same way, but to be close together, to be physically touching, and communicating whatever thoughts you have, because it is very intimate, right? It's very vulnerable when you don't have anything on. But to be that close and to foster connection, intimacy, bonding, and the hormone that comes with that bonding, right? That might be a really good thing to consider postpartum. So this is no magic bullet to prevent postpartum depression in moms or dads, but I'm simply saying I think it's worth considering to add that to your repertoire postpartum. And one other thought, I think this is the last thought, one last thought about this is the point of this isn't, lady, to somehow be like a guilt trip or like, oh, this is just one more thing you gotta watch out for or you have to be in charge of. No, I don't think it's our responsibility to take responsibility for someone else's mental health. But since I know we both care so much about the men in our lives, the fathers of our children, I'm simply saying these are things to be aware of. It's not your responsibility to fix him, just like it's not mine to fix my husband, right? In any circumstances, postpartum or not. But it can be really good to have just that little bit of awareness, not fear, not anxiety, but just awareness of what can happen so that we can just be on the lookout. Not in a super hypervigilant way, just aware. And if it's relevant, then we can help him get help. Not because we blame ourselves, no, but just simply to say this is the person who I love and who loves me. And if I notice something concerning going on with that person, no matter when it is, I'm going to take action because I love them. I hope that makes sense. All right, lady. I'll talk to you later. Bye.